And aloha again. Welcome to the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Intelligence Keynote presentation provided by Rear Admiral Thomas Henderschedt, Director, J2, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. You may find his bio on the AFCEA TechNet Pacific app under Speakers. If you have any questions for the general questions, please text those to the address located on the screens, located on my left. They will be provided to him for answer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for this afternoon guest speaker, the Director for Intelligence, J2, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Rear Admiral Thomas Henderschedt.
Hey, aloha everyone and good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Hey, I'll apologize up front. This topic is a little emotional for me. I've spent the better part of my career as a naval intelligence officer focused on the PRC, including 9 years of service in Beijing as an attaché. And I would thank DoD for giving me a great job and the fact that I have a hobby and profession that are the same. And I'd also thank a very understanding spouse who's willing to have some very unique living arrangements over the last several decades. I have 4 sons. They've all grown up in the PRC in Taiwan. They all speak Chinese, and they too are understanding of a father and a dinner table conversation that always circles back to our strategic challenges. So I had an 8-year-old who would talk about Freeman navigation operations, probably more than most. But hey, what I want to talk to you about today, as the J2, is probably, and I have prepared remarks, but probably what you may not expect from the Indo-PACOM J2. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the military challenge, but what I also want to talk to you about, specifically from my background and living it firsthand, are some of the other challenges for which I would recommend that we're all aware. So thank you to AFCEA. Thanks for allowing me to come out this afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to share a perspective. So following a senior United States congressional delegation visit to Taipei in August of 2022, elements of the People's Liberation Army executed countermeasure exercises in and around the Taiwan Strait. Not only was this activity larger than prior periods of tension, such as the so-called 1995-96 Taiwan Strait crisis, but the complexity, coordination, composition, and capacity demonstrated in the summer of 2022 not unexpectedly reveal a far more advanced, lethal, and joint People's Liberation Army than observed 30 years ago. The activity signaled the PRC's resolve and set a new normal of PLA coercive behavior both around Taiwan and across the region. The activity included exponential increases in PLA flights into the Taiwan Air Defense Identification Zone, significant PLA crossings of the Taiwan Strait centerline, PLA Navy surface ship operations surrounding Taiwan, also included drones near and in some cases over Taiwan claimed and occupied outlying islands, and several declared exercise closure areas around Taiwan. Like in 1996, PLA activities culminated in ballistic missile and, in this case, multiple rocket launcher firings into closure areas near Taiwan, including overflight of Taiwan territory to impact Japan's exclusive economic zone. The PLA demonstrated integrated fires, a multi-domain pressure campaign, and a blockade rehearsal against Taiwan. The PRC's actions were, in the words of Kurt Campbell, the U.S. Deputy Assistant to the President and Coordinator for the Indo-Pacific, provocative, destabilizing, and unprecedented. And the activities continue a trend of PRC behavior which not only ignores international rules and norms, but also emphasizes Beijing's perspective that the PRC sets the standards for allowable behavior, not international law. Intimidation and coercion through the threatened use of hard power, whether the use of water cannons against Philippine resupply vessels at 2nd Thomas Shoal, or a J-16 chaffing an Australian P-8 in international airspace, it has the intended impact. Beijing desires that all nations in the region question their own respective lawful operations near the PRC and hopes to coerce the cessation of unwelcome activities, even where international law is not on Beijing's side. So how did we get here? I'm a big believer in understanding the historical context of the bilateral relationship as an insight into today's developments. In 1977, Deng Xiaoping framed and called for the 4 modernizations. This framework provided insight into what we should expect some 45 years later. Deng argued that China needed to modernize agriculture, industry, technology, and defense in that order. Arguably, the CCP informed us of what was to come. In the 1980s, the U.S. military relationship changed as we pursued engagement with the PRC and the PLA to hedge against the Soviet threat. In addition to ship visits and senior leader engagements, we transferred significant, at the time, technology including LM-2500 gas turbine engines, Q-36, Q-37 counter-battery radar, 24 S-70 Blackhawks, and under the Peace Pearl program, we had a plan for Grumman to retrofit 50 J-8 Finbacks and retrofit their air intercept radar. Tiananmen Square in 1989 halted that cooperation and provided insight into the party, perhaps indicative of the nature of the party we would eventually face. Chinese Communist Party perceptions of Gorbachev's fatal errors in liberalization of both the Soviet economy and political system probably indicate that party change is unlikely to impossible in the near term. And PLA perceptions and analysis of U.S. operations during the 1991 Gulf War, especially the use of precision-guided munitions, presented a revolution in military affairs and alarmed and energized CCP leadership to commence and sustain changes, including modernization and informationization of the People's Liberation Army. This, combined with the so-called 1995-96 Taiwan Strait crisis, drove the rapid military modernization begun in the 2000s with which we are dealing today. I find the change in the PLA I've observed in my career as a naval intelligence officer nothing short of breathtaking. In 1998, the modern PLA Navy was a force of 2 Luhu destroyers, 1 Luhai destroyer, 1 Song submarine, and 4 Kilo submarines. The bulk of the force was 60s vintage Luda destroyers and Jianghu frigates, with Romeo and Ming submarines. The 90s PLAF, the People's Liberation Air Force, was a smattering of Su-27 MKK flanker, but the overwhelming majority were J-7 fish cans and J-8 Finback. Today, the PLAF consists of J-10 Firebird, J-11 Flanker, and J-20 Fagan. The plan put nearly 30 combatants in the water in 2019. I've had the honor and the responsibility to directly observe the PLA and interact with its senior leaders as a 3-time attaché in Beijing. I observed a humble PLA in 2006, a confident PLA in 2016, and an assertive PLA by 2020. I've known a Central Military Commission that evolved under Hu Jintao to elevate service commanders into the Military Commission, and directly observed the evolution and results of the 2015 military reforms under Xi to remove the services, reinforce the joint of the PLA, emphasize space and cyber under the Strategic Support Force, and integrate the People's Armed Police and the Coast Guard into the PRC military. I've observed the reduction of military regions from 7 to 5 theater commands, and watched the PLA enjoy breathtaking strides in modernization. Frankly stated, the evolution of the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party, that's the PLA, in the past 30 years is remarkable. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Intelligence Directorate continuously monitors the PRC's military activities, the operations of the People's Liberation Army, including its components, on a daily basis. U.S. Indo-PACOM Commander Admiral Aquilino publicly and rightly cautions, however, that the PRC is, quote, utilizing all norms of national power to uproot the rules-based international order in ways that benefit themselves at the expense of others, end quote. While the world is justly concerned with the regional and global impacts of the PLA's coercive military behavior, its rapid military modernization, and its lack of transparency on the PLA's strategic aims, the world is failing to address the CCP's daily and successful use of its elements of national power to reshape the international community through diplomatic, law enforcement, and economic pressure tactics, all while attempting to project an image of not interfering in other countries' internal affairs. The evidence is overwhelming that the PRC's norm-bending behaviors are both threatening and too often successful, and we need to set the record straight. While there's no doubt that the PRC is the pacing threat for the United States and our allies and partners, all too frequently the threat is viewed only in the context of the military competition, admittedly of critical importance to the Department of Defense as well as to myself, the J2. But less well recognized and largely hidden by PRC design are other elements of national power leveraged against the world in subtle, many times unnoticed actions. These actions, sometimes even ascribed to mistakes of interpretation or perception, are designed to challenge an international order which, ironically, enabled the post-1949 rise of the PRC, but is now a target of that very Chinese Communist Party. Clausewitz, of course, argued that war is not merely a political act, but a real political instrument, a continuation of political intercourse, a carrying out of the same by other means. In this century, the CCP has demonstrated mastery over the weaponization of all elements of national power and now operates in a steady stream of competition that is increasingly adversarial with diminishing opportunities for cooperation in the region. Beijing uses this extremely dangerous and unprecedented methodology to attain its national goals, even when in contravention of international law or a century of common practice or norms, be they the advancement of PRC sovereignty claims, the deployment of PRC economy against sovereign states, the campaign against free speech, or the apparent extraterritoriality of the PRC's law enforcement activities. While the Secretary of Defense strives for integrated deterrence, the Chinese Communist Party demonstrates integrated coercion on a daily basis in the diplomatic, legal, economic, and cultural spheres. Beijing's rewriting of regional and cultural norms, whether in its aggressive operations around Taiwan and in the South China Sea, its diplomatic temper tantrums, or its economic coercion, are a great threat to the international community today. It's worth examining a few of the PRC's norm-bending behaviors outside the classical military arena. In contrast to integrated coercion, integrated deterrence is focused on upholding the rules-based international order. As an example, the U.S. Freedom of Navigation program, in existence since 1979, challenges excessive maritime claims that are inconsistent with the international law of the sea and impinge upon the rights, freedoms, and uses of the sea and airspace guaranteed to all states under international law. The U.S. FON program is principles-based and administered with regard to the excessive nature of certain maritime claims rather than the identity of the nation asserting those claims. The U.S. FON program has challenged the excessive claims made by some of our closest allies, like Japan and Italy, some major defense partners like India, as well as strategic competitors like Russia and China. Yet Beijing continually mischaracterizes such activities as targeted against China. Anything less than this steady drumbeat of legal challenges put into practice through FON results in the PRC quickly filling the void, metaphorically through lawfare arguments, and physically with a wide range of military and quasi-military maneuvers meant to box out everyone else in the region. Indeed, the PRC's excessive maritime claims are subject to U.S. FON assertions because the PRC's excessive maritime claims are especially egregious, sweeping, and expansive. One can visit the U.S. State Department limits in the C series and the U.S. Navy's Maritime Claims Reference Manual for a survey of the PRC's excessive maritime claims, or the arbitral tribunal's ruling in the case of the Philippines versus PRC, which unanimously found a range of PRC maritime claims to be legally baseless and invalid, that the PRC had unlawfully interfered with the Philippines' maritime rights in its own exclusive economic zone. The PRC's excessive maritime claims threaten the rules-based maritime order in a variety of ways. Take the South China Sea, for example, of which the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said, quote, "Freedom of the seas is an enduring interest of all nations and is vital to global peace and prosperity. The international community has long benefited from the rules-based maritime order. Nowhere is the rules-based maritime order under greater threat than in the South China Sea. The People's Republic of China continues to coerce and intimidate Southeast Asian coastal states, threatening freedom of navigation in this critical global thruway," end quote. Indeed, Beijing's excessive maritime claims necessitate continual challenges. The People's Republic of China Ministry of Foreign Affairs Oceans and Boundaries Bureau has not formally enunciated many of Beijing's claims in the South China Sea. So, for example, Beijing has refused to clarify its ambiguous and legally baseless 9-dash line, or whether it purports to claim all South China Sea features, all features plus a territorial sea of 12 nautical miles, or all features, islands, and ocean, the entirety of the South China Sea. Rather, Beijing hopes that its continued narrative of the South China Sea, encompassed by the ambiguous 9-dash line, is interpreted by the world as PRC territory. Freedom of navigation operations, which challenge the PRC's excessive straight baseline claim around the entirety of the Paracel Islands, are met with Chinese allegations of illegally entering PRC territorial waters and false claims that the PRC has expelled said vessels from those waters. PRC interlocutors accuse U.S. freedom of navigation operations in the Spratly Islands as illegally entering the PRC's adjacent sea, another ambiguous term designed by Beijing to be heard as territorial waters and cause other nations to fret or self-censor concerning legal entry. Beijing's hope that the world interchanges territorial waters and adjacent sea is a largely successful erosion of international law in Beijing's favor. In other words, Beijing enjoys a territorial sea, or perhaps something broader, by coercing or intimidating sovereign nations to avoid quote-unquote adjacent water space, even where territorial seas are not claimed or entitled. A recent deployment to the Indo-Pacific illustrates this point. Even before setting sail, defense leaders from a non-Indo-Pacific nation noted their ship would not enter within 12 nautical miles of any territory claimed by the PRC. Implicitly recognizing a territorial sea to features that Beijing had not bothered to formally claim nor clarify, or features not legally capable of generating a territorial sea. In fact, this can be viewed as a reverse fawn on features like Fiery Cross Reef and Mischief Reef, inadvertently recognizing a 12 nautical mile territorial sea where one was not formally claimed, just as Beijing has hoped. The key in dealing with PRC excessive maritime claims is not to say what one won't do, but rather to reinforce a right to fly, sail, and operate everywhere in accordance with international law. A PRC's erosion of international norms, laws, and rules extends well beyond maritime claims in the South China Sea and is distorting the integrity of law enforcement operations all over the world. For example, several cities in Western Europe have recently noted the presence of PRC police stations and law enforcement officers within their borders, ostensibly from Chinese explanation to assist Chinese nationals and facilitate driver's license renewals. These stations, however, appear to be outposts which enable Operation Fox Hunt-like activities, the PRC's extra-legal efforts to track down offenders abroad, including dissidents, for crimes allegedly committed in the PRC. Once found, targets, including U.S. citizens, are frequently coerced into returning to the PRC or used as bargaining chips in criminal cases. Fox Hunt has also reportedly kidnapped targets to face rendition to the PRC. Any interlocutor with the CCP and the PLA is frequently lectured on the PRC's century of humiliation, largely framed by the period from the Opium Wars to the 1949 establishment of the People's Republic. The significant irony in this accusation is that the main CCP issue with the century of humiliation, and it's legitimate, is it was a period of extraterritoriality of foreign citizens enabled by the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, which provided the jurisdiction of great powers over their own citizens in China, instead of the applicability of Chinese law. Fox hunt exerts this same extraterritoriality into the 2020s. The PRC's current extraterritoriality, however, is not limited to Operation Fox Hunt. The PRC has significantly amplified its efforts to punish people well outside of its own borders. The National Law Review finds that China's 2021 anti-foreign sanctions law, which prohibits the compliance with foreign sanctions and export controls that impact the PRC adversely, is the PRC's, quote, own legal regime of extraterritorial jurisdiction, end quote, largely levied to deter sanctions against PRC companies and authorities. The PRC's efforts to reshape the legality of its rules-busting behaviors in the South China Sea and in cities all over the world are certainly concerning, but no behavior has been more of an attack on the rules-based order than the PRC's use of economic coercion to shape political decisions that Beijing finds uncomfortable. In the fall of 2021, after Lithuania announced that it would open a Taiwan representative office, the PRC reacted with great ire for the temerity to use the word Taiwan, vice the somewhat more acceptable Taipei. Beijing, in a petulant response, removed Lithuania from its online customs forms as punishment for this transgression, thereby eliminating the possibility of import or exports without the need for formalized and illegal sanctions against Lithuania. As the Center for Strategic and International Studies identified, following Beijing's inability to shape Vilnius through this customs attack, Beijing next threatened sanctions on third country firms that did business with Lithuanian upstarts, causing Europeans to ask Lithuania to, quote, seek a constructive solution, end quote. Likewise, following PRC dissatisfaction with Australia's handling of their bilateral relationship, Beijing imposed 100 to 200% tariffs on Australian wine, having the desired impact on ending Australian access to its largest wine export market in contravention of WTO regulations. A PRC's economic throw weight has placed nearly every country, including the United States, at a place of vulnerability to economic coercion. All of these norm-bending behaviors have been accompanied by an extreme escalation of aggressive diplomatic measures, which are anything but diplomatic. Encouraged by the PRC foreign minister, Wang Yi, to display a fighting spirit, the PRC's wolf warrior diplomats comfortably note from the podium what no nation's senior diplomats would dare say even privately. Examples include PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman Zhao Lijian tweeting a digitally altered image of an Australian soldier with a bloody knife to an Afghan child, PRC Embassy to Pakistan Cultural Counselor Zhang Heching's infamous tweet of the way we treat our friends with a picture of a thumb up and the way we treat our enemies with the middle finger. Or the recent incident in Manchester where the PRC Consul General and staff allegedly dragged a legal protester onto the consulate grounds and physically assaulted him. While some may see Beijing's diplomatic turn as merely bad taste, this spirit departs from the norms of quiet diplomacy and enables, even encourages, the opposite, an offensive rhetorical tone. The world's diplomatic train has moved on to a dangerous track with Beijing as its conductor. Beijing's most dangerous attack on diplomacy, however, is its demonstrated comfort with hostage diplomacy, a particularly egregious threat to the world order. In Canada, in December of 2018, local authorities arrested the chief financial officer of Huawei, Ms. Meng Wanzhou, due to Meng's attempts to sell Huawei products to Iran in clear violation of U.S. sanctions. 9 days later, in retaliation, the PRC arrested Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavrin, Canadian citizens, in the PRC. While Meng spent her 2 years in house arrest living in a $13 million mansion in Canada, The Michaels were subjected to a tortured existence in PRC prisons. The arrest of the two Michaels was seen exactly for what it was, and frankly for what was desired by Beijing, retaliation for the arrest and the accountability of Meng. As distasteful as the Meng two Michaels affair is, it shouldn't be viewed as an isolated incident. Beijing views such coercive diplomatic behavior as a legitimate tool and considers exit bans on foreign citizens to achieve national objectives as fair play. Liu Changming reportedly embezzled $1.4 billion and fled the PRC. Liu's son, Victor Liu, a U.S. citizen, traveled to the PRC to visit a dying grandfather in 2018. The CCP viewed Victor and his sister Cynthia as legitimate targets and exit banned them from the PRC. In other words, not allowed to depart. Show up at the airport, can't get on the plane to leave. They did the exit ban in order to coerce Liu Changming back to the PRC to face charges. This effort failed to realize that Liu had no ties with his family since 2012. Still, the children were perceived by Beijing as legitimate tools to pressure his return. No one is safe as a guest of the PRC if anyone can be used as a tool to further national goals without the protections of international law. All of these efforts to warp the international rules-based order are wrapped up in the PRC's increasingly sophisticated and effective messaging efforts. It uses punishing language against diplomats and attachés, including the trope that they've hurt the feelings of 1.4 billion Chinese people. I've been accused of that frequently. Beijing has also worked diligently to shape the softer narratives with tacit pressure on Hollywood, as an example, to adjust what is acceptable in pursuit of money, in pursuit of the money that China's huge market represents. So from changing the antagonists in the 2012 Red Dawn remake from PRC to DPRK, to igniting a debate about the cruise patch on Maverick's leather jacket in Top Gun Maverick, to inserting in the 9-dash line in the DreamWorks 2019 cartoon Abominable. It's not just an exercise in optics, but an ability for Beijing to control what is said about China. In 2019, following the Houston Rockets general manager's tweet to, quote, "fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong," Beijing pulled NBA broadcasts from CCTV and signaled to merchants in China that the sale of Rockets apparel was unacceptable. The PRC's Confucius Institutes, largely viewed by universities as highly subsidized, in other words, free, means of building a Chinese language and culture program, essentially prohibit any collegiate discussion or debate on Tibet, Taiwan, Xinjiang, etc. Confucius Institutes, as designated by the Department of State, are in fact foreign missions and are principally operated under the direction of the United Front Work Department, an organization charged with co-opting and neutralizing sources of potential opposition to the policies and authorities of the Chinese Communist Party. Confucius Institutes are no more than outposts of the state, trading Chinese language education for the control of Socratic engagement. The predictions that China's internal challenges will push the PRC to moderate its problematic external behaviors are not based on any accurate assessment of the PRC's actions or intentions. Instead, as Xi enters his third term leading the PRC, Beijing will only intensify efforts to use all elements of national power to coerce the behavior of the international community towards its bent. Pushing back against that coercion is difficult by design, but it is indispensable. We must see the PRC's international policy initiatives for what they are: attempts to sanitize any form of criticism of Xi and the CCP. Just as one anti-Xi banner hanging from a bridge in Beijing several weeks ago is a threat to the entirety of the CCP, refusal to accept the PRC's position on Taiwan, on the South China Sea, or on its unfettered access to sensitive technologies will be met with all elements of diplomatic and economic harassment, even including the threat of missiles. The PRC's softer side is no less alarming. The recent promotion of the Global Development Initiative and Global Security Initiative, highlighted by Xi during the 20th Party Congress, should also be seen for what they are: an effort by Beijing to undermine the international order and replace it with a Chinese rule system. There is, however, a way forward. As Secretary Blinken noted in May during a speech at the George Washington University, quote, "We want to strengthen a system in which as many countries as possible can come together to cooperate effectively, resolve differences peacefully, and write their own futures as sovereign equals," end quote. We need to stand together. Thanks very much for the opportunity to address you today. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, sir. We do have several questions from the audience. First, how do we identify and combat Chinese-sponsored organizations on U.S. college campuses?
Yeah, I think, do you guys mind if I get down from the stage? Sure. Great. Yeah, I think that we're doing a pretty good job. So I noted in my presentation that the Department of State has classified Confucian Institutes as foreign missions. I think that part of what gives me energy every day is we are starting to understand what is happening. When I started this a couple of decades ago, we were pretty ill-informed, but I think we're making headway. I think one of the challenges, and this question highlights it, is that if you recall, I talked about the importance of the historical context. What we perceived was inviting Chinese students to the United States, going through our higher education. They would fall in love with democracy and return to China, and democracy would break out. And looking back on it, that was a pretty naive perspective. And what's transpired recently, there is a tough spot in the fact that some U.S. colleges, for your information, Chinese students, and I applaud them coming to the United States, Chinese students are cash payers and full cash payers at U.S. universities. Unfortunately, some universities have created an economic model where Chinese enrollment is necessary for them to stay solvent. They've got a poor model. But what's happening now, more so now than when this started in the 80s, is that Chinese students tend to come to our colleges, and there's a requirement by the state to organize and, for lack of a better term, create party cells. The consul generals frequently visit folks and make sure that they're studying and talking about the right things. I think that our hope of what was going to happen is not only unrealistic, we can probably argue that the opposite has happened. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Next audience question. This theater has the largest geographic and largest denied access areas to cover. What are your most concerning sensor gaps for collecting deep? Have hyperspectral sensors been employed at all? So
I talked to the boss this morning, and there's probably a lot of questions as a J2 that I'm not going to answer. I would say that we have a challenge. We're getting after the challenge in a creative and aggressive manner. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And of course, we should preface all these questions with, to the extent that you can speak to them in this forum.
Don't worry.
Next question. Do you view the island bases built in the South China Sea as liabilities or assets for the Chinese?
So I have a feeling that I'm going to get through the question and answer this afternoon kind of the way I got through college. I can't answer the question you asked, but I might answer a question that I want to answer. So here's what I'd say is that we are now facing a significant challenge. If you read our guiding documents, NSS, NDS, you can see how we talk about the pacing threat. I would say that we should keep things in perspective, that as the Chinese expand, they're going to face certain challenges and that are not necessarily apparent. We have military that's capable of worldwide operations, the PLA has a long way to go until it gets there. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. How do the recent crackdowns in Hong Kong by China influence Indo-PACOM's actions in the theater?
Boy, this is going to be a tough afternoon. I think, so I preface this by saying I was in Beijing for Hong Kong. So I would give everyone Mike Studeman's email address, my predecessor, and he can answer that question. I think that what we've observed, though, through behavior in Hong Kong is there's no difference between Hong Kong and the mainland anymore. Anybody who's a Westpac sailor, who did Liberty visits in Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s, you likely wouldn't recognize what is occurring there. Frankly, anybody who's been through Beijing before 2020, if you went there now, you wouldn't recognize the city. It's very, very different. I think that the Department of State has done admirable work with Hong Kong, or with what's transpired in Hong Kong. And I think that the big issue here is the effect that it's no longer an easy Liberty port to get to for sailors. It's I'll talk historically, it's always been a challenge. There were periods, 2007, with visits shut off at the last minute, which for an aircraft carrier and 5,000 families, that's a tough impact, but it's just not the same as it had been in the past.
Thank you. The next question has two parts. First, in what areas do you see corporate industry providing capability to Indo-PACOM to help satisfy your intelligence requirements? And how can industry best engage your team to demonstrate or provide a proof of concept for a technology we believe meets a current and future need?
Well, I think the best answer here is this is a challenge that we need some pretty unconventional and new out-of-the-box thinking. And I would also argue that this is not a near-term challenge. This is going to be a challenge that's with us for a very long time. We have a structure that's very much that evolved under the Cold War. We probably need to look to structure for maybe a different structure for competition. I think for industry, if you've got an idea, and I would say that I have people giving me solutions to problems I didn't know I had. We've got great members of the team here in the front row who are getting after some of our challenges. But I think that if you have a solution to one of our problems or one of our challenges, let us know, and we want to hear about where some of the thinking is on some of these tough challenges. And I mean, fundamentally, as a military, we're facing a very, very different challenge than we have for the past several decades. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Next question. How vulnerable is she to economic slowdown?
A great question. This one I feel a little bit more comfortable. Thank you. Who Thanks, Larry. Yeah. I wasn't even planted. Hey, so one of the things, let me just tell, I guess I owe you some sea stories from my time in the PRC. One of the frequent questions I would get from senior military is, hey, what keeps them up at night? That's, everybody wants, and they want to hear, whatever they're in command of, they want to hear, hey, it's, whatever widget you drive or what, it's you guys. I would argue that that's probably not true. And I kept a binder on my desk I gave this pitch so many times that I just referred to the notes. And I would argue that there are about 24 issues that keep she up at night, and all of them are internal, and all of them are of a magnitude that most Americans cannot get their head around because of the span and scope of the country. When you're talking about 1.4 billion people, you got challenges any challenge is a big problem because of the size. So economic slowdown, I think, is really, really significant. I alluded in my presentation to the fact that, if you recall, when Tiananmen happened, recall what was happening around the world, what was happening with the Soviet Union. The Chinese saw what transpired in the Soviet Union and are very cognizant of the fact that they ascribed the blame to the fall of the Soviet Union to the actions of Gorbachev to liberalize the economy and the political system at the same time. So what that's driven the Chinese Communist Party to do is make a tacit deal with their citizenry that we will grow the economy, we will make everybody wealthy. Hey, Tong, good to see you. We'll make everybody wealthy, but we're not going to liberalize the political system. So obviously, when you have 2 decades of double-digit economic growth, that's a fair deal. When that growth slows, stops, or turns around, that gets to be a dangerous deal to have to support growth when that's kind of what's keeping the party moving forward. The current economic situation in the PRC is significantly poor. Zero COVID policies that I got to enjoy every day are not helping the situation. But like many other areas, the party likely has doubled down on that again, coming out of the 20th Party Congress, where zero COVID is going to continue for a while. So to make a short answer very long, I think that there's significant vulnerability when the economic situation gets much worse, if it does.
Thank you, sir. What can Indo-PACOM do to make it easier for our allies and partners to establish deeper working relationships with Taiwan and thereby increase deterrence?
So I think that I'm a firm believer in allies and partners. I worked with great partners in Beijing, great Five Eyes partners. I also worked with some pretty non-traditional partners. If you said China, you probably wouldn't think of some of the countries that are very, very supportive and helpful on this issue. I think what I'll talk about here is general allies and partners. We're doing everything, and I'll speak for our directorate. If you came to visit us at Indo-PACOM, I think we put our money where our mouth is. My deputy is a superb civilian, Kathy Johnson. And my vice is Commodore Dean Commons, a Royal Australian Navy officer. We are completely integrated. This is an issue, and the Indo-PACOM is about allies and partners. I think I'd fall back also to some of our policy documents. When the PRC sees some of our policies, they're obviously very critical of what we're doing. But if you read our policy documents, and a great example is the Indo-Pacific strategy from the White House, listening to my peers from the State Department talk about this, if you read that document, it's really a document of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? That we believe that a free and open Indo-Pacific is good for everyone. And frankly, when we talk to our colleagues in Beijing, a free and open Indo-Pacific is what facilitated the rise of China. It was good for China. I would argue it remains good for China. And the narrative is, hey, we're not asking a choice, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to provide choices. And when we engage partners in Beijing, we would be very forthright of, hey, we're not asking you to sign up for everything. We're presenting, this is who we are, what we're about. You can join us for some, all, none, but it's your choice. So I think really critical what our allies and partners are doing, and really critical how we are incorporating them every day at Indo-PACOM. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Next question. Do you believe the Chinese, were they to invade Taiwan, would be similarly surprised by Taiwan's will to fight, as Russia apparently has been in Ukraine?
Yeah, another very good question and a pretty common question. I think I was in Beijing for the invasion. I think that how the invasion unfolded was a great surprise to Beijing. I think that the whole world is watching what's unfolding in Europe and trying to come to conclusions about what that means around the world. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone is doing that. And in some cases, there are probably very applicable lessons to take from what's happening. There are also some quote-unquote lessons learned that are probably not necessarily lessons to incorporate. I'll talk a bit. Trying to classify what will is pretty hard. I don't know that anybody can say what that is now or later, but I know that what Ukraine proved is that a will, some organization is pretty significant against that adversary. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Can you expand on how you're looking at the economic impacts that China and North Korea are having in the area of responsibility? Are you noticing an uptick in ransomware and other illicit economic activities?
Yeah, I really don't, the second half of that question, I really don't have any comment. But I would look at, as I said earlier, every day when I read the paper and read about what's happening economically, banks falling or folding, or what's happening in the Chinese real estate market, that's got to be of significant concern. And much like 2008, China as a juggernaut, what happens in the Chinese economy is going to drive the rest of the world, and that's what we need to be concerned with. So the challenge is what happens, as I said earlier, what happens if there's a significant downturn, what that does to Beijing, and then what that does to the region. So I'll say that I'm looking a lot at the economic impacts in the region and what it's going to do to the region. But I also know that if I could predict that, I should probably be in Vegas and not here. It's a significant challenge. It will have an impact. What that is and what the tipping point is, I don't know that anybody can say that today. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Can you speak at all about the implications for China's foreign and defense policies now that Xi has consolidated his personal power?
Yeah, this one, again, this is a bit of a, thanks, yeah. So I was one of those folks, I'm the PLA geek that does this at home. My wife is tired of me talking about the Central Military Commission. The 20th Party Congress was kind of like fantasy football for me. As a matter of fact, and Tong, my friend from Beijing, would appreciate this. As I was preparing to leave China, I had an out call with my senior PLA interlocutor, and I was saying that we in our office in the embassy, we spent a lot of time watching the PLA and watching leadership shifts, and that we had a fantasy football league for the Central Military Commission. So I had kind of so I had to explain what fantasy football was first to the PLA general, and then explain, hey, I have my personal picks, and I'm willing to put some money on the table with you too right now to bet on who your new leaders. He didn't go for it. But what's fascinating, hey, listen, what you're seeing following the 20th Party Congress is a pretty fascinating transformation. There's a couple things I'd highlight for you about what happened. So first of all, I would say that a lot of things that we used to call rules are now, I wouldn't even be comfortable calling them suggestions anymore. A lot of the rules have collapsed. So there was a 7 up, 8 down rule, which means if you hit the party Congress and you were 67, you could go into the next Congress. If you were 68, you would be retired. Xi Jinping is 69. The new first vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, Zhang Youxia, is 72. Those rules were put in place to basically prevent a those norms, I should say, were put in place by Deng to prevent a repeat of the Mao era. They're gone. Xi Jinping is around, obviously, for likely another 5 years. And what he has done, and I'll speak to kind of my area in the Central Military Commission, is there's a lot of transformations just in the last 5 to 10 years. I spoke about how in 2006, the services were brought into the CMC. After the 2015 reforms, they were not. Some shaken around military regions to theater commands. Zhang Youxia has moved from the second vice chairman to the first vice chairman. And there are several other holdouts. Miao Hua and Zhang Shengming are still in the CMC in their roles as in the political side for Miao and discipline inspection for Zhang Shengming. He Weidong is coming from Army, Chief of the Army. He's now the second vice chairman. The other interesting personality I would point out is General Li Shangfu, who's a former head of the Equipment Development Department, has a significant space background and cyber background that he's bringing into the Central Military Commission. He's also, just for interest, Li Shangfu was sanctioned by the United States in 2018 under the CAATSA sanctions. So he's, the Chinese perceive Li as the secretary's counterpart. And that's interesting. The last kind of bit of weirdness that I'll leave you with is that if you go log on to the Ministry of National Defense's homepage, and I don't suggest you do that, but if you do, you'll see that we're in a very unique time. So what transpired in the 20th Party Congress was, the outcome of the Congress was the announcement of the Chinese Communist Party Central Military Commission. There is still a state military commission that's a holdover from the last. So if you go on the webpage, you'll literally see there are 2 central military commissions at the same time. So the guys who are just kind of out of the Central Military Commission are still listed as active in the State Military Commission. So just a little trivia when you go home and have that dinner table conversation tonight about the Central Military Commission that's going on. So what are the implications? My personal perception is that she has brought, from the Chinese perspective, significant operational experience into the Central Military Commission, significant operational combat experience, and that's a different definition by Chinese standards. Zhang Youxia, Liu Jianli are 79 to 82 war with Vietnam veterans. Probably not what we would classify as combat experience. A lot of significant experience from Eastern Theater Command, Nanjing, former Nanjing Military Region, 31st Group Army experience is now on the Central Military Commission. So I think that what that implies or suggests is a focus on preparations of the PLA and a likelihood of a more outwardly facing foreign policy. Thanks. One more?
Thank you, sir. Our final question from the audience today. Can you speak at all about potential actions you might expect China to take in response to the CHIPS Act?
I really wish I knew. I think it's significant. I haven't yet heard about what the official response has been. I wish I had it. If you asked me that question, maybe in a week I'd have a better answer for you. I'm sorry. I'll give you one more if there's any more, since that's kind of too near term. Any other questions? Or that's, sir.
Demographics in China. You talked about this economic slowdown. What about the lingering effects of the one-child rule?
Yeah. This is, remember I said I kept a notebook with about 24 topics. All of them are tough. Demographics is another tough issue. I was there when the Chinese changed the one child policy to a 2 and then a 3 child policy. And I was at a reception and I was talking to 2 young women journalists about what it meant to them. I think that for us, it's difficult to understand what that really means because the way things work in China, a family is responsible for providing for their son or daughter, and that means house, car, all the way through marriage. In a city like Beijing, it's a pretty expensive city, believe it or not. So trying to buy a place for a kid to live, that's probably $1 million US, middle class standards-ish. So when you're going from 1 to 2 kids and doubling the amount of output that you have to come up with that quick, the party's reaction to go from 1 child to 2 and then to 3 was decades too late. And just perceiving that you flip a switch and give people permission to have another kid and that it's going to fix your demographic challenges, it's an order of magnitude more complicated in China than it is here because of how expensive it is to do that, to plan for it, and to make it happen. So I'm curious about what's going to happen. I know that the demographic challenges are already challenging. The unemployed young male population is going to be a problem. The kind of under 30 unemployment is tough. You have a lot of unemployed men who statistically are going to have a hard time starting a family. It's a little scary. So, hey, everybody, let me just leave you with thanks very much for letting me come out today. It's really always great to get out of the office and chat with people. This is an issue that obviously, as I said in my opening, I've got a military challenge, and that's where my responsibility is as the J2. But I also have kind of a responsibility to share with people what the last 9 years were like for me, or the 9 years I spent in the PRC. So my mom and dad in Middle America asking, hey, why is this a problem? This is a significant problem for us, and I'll just share with you that on April 19th, 2019, I was in the audience in Qingdao when I heard Xi Jinping talk about the need to recast the international rules-based order. He was specifically talking about UNCLOS because it was a maritime conversation, but the fact that there's kind of comfort and or it is comfortable or permissible, or there's not discomfort in talking about the need to reshape the international system. That should be a concern to all of us. And I would also say, for those of you who would accuse us of not being fair, the international system is structured so that it benefits everybody. And if you have a problem with the international system, there's a way to change the international system to migrate it to the benefit of all. The problem is when somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm going to change this to benefit me because I've been disadvantaged over the last however many years. That's a challenge, and it's a challenge we're going to have to deal with. So thanks very much. I wish you luck, and please help us with our challenge. Thanks a lot, Larry. Thank you.
Can you hear me in the back? Yep. Want to thank the Admiral for being here on behalf of AFCEA International and also on behalf of AFCEA Hawaii. I'd also like to say that in addition to the coin that we gave you, that we're also going to make a donation in your name for Friends of Windward Wounded Warriors.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
So
thank you.
We appreciate very much your being here.
Thanks a lot.
So before we leave, I'll turn it over to our MC who's got some words for us.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Admiral, for this for the presentation and the information that you can share based off this unclassified area. All right, so ladies and so just a couple of admin remarks, ladies. So at 1600, we'll be having our 4th panel titled "Emerging Concepts, Capabilities, and Technology in the Indo-Pacific" here in the same ballroom, and also the Pauhana events at 6 p.m. This evening. That's all the information I have. This concludes our event. Many thanks for your attention and support. Thank you.